Welcome to MRII's Insights and Innovators podcast, where we talk to top market research professionals to get their inside stories about innovative and enduring best practices. Today's episode is sponsored by Full Circle. Named the Panel Company of the Year, Full Circle is a leading provider of high-quality online insight, leveraging survey experience, advanced tech, flexible community strategies, and unparalleled quality controls. We give you immediate access to proven data for better insights. Now, here's your host for today's episode.
Hi, everyone. Thanks for joining today's episode of Insights and Innovators. I'm your host, Stan Sanunathan. Today is a special episode because it's a two-in-one episode. The topic is all about not just entrepreneurs who are transforming the insights industry, but it is also about a subject that is very close to a lot of insights professionals. And that's all about how do you get a seat at the table. Today, we have somebody who is at the table. So, we're going to have a very interesting conversation, which is two-pronged. One is about an entrepreneur who transformed insight industry and somebody who's at the table who can give us some coaching and guidance on what we need to do to get a seat at the table. We have a perfect guest for this topic, and that guest is Diane Hessen. Diane is a visionary and disruptor rolled into one, and I've known her for 20 plus years, and she's awesome. In this episode, Diane shares her perspective on her journey. There's a lot to be learned from what she has gone through and what she has done over the years. I'm sure you're in for a treat today. So sit back and enjoy. Welcome, Diane.
Thanks, Dan. Great to be here.
Thank you.
Can't believe we've known each other for 20 years.
Yeah, I'd say, we're dating ourselves here.
You must have been in high school then. Yeah.
I would love to believe that, but my background would be otherwise. Anyway, I would like to ask a few questions about you. But before that, I want your take on where you think our industry is today, the insights industry is today. What are your thoughts on that?
Well, look, the tools and methodologies change, and there's so many challenges these days. But I feel like the biggest one that we have plays out like as a triangle. So we have to balance three things: speed of insights, depth of insights, and relevance to the business. And getting all three of those and striking a balance is very, very challenging. So speed, especially with AI, is breathtaking these days. I mean, what we're able to find out relatively inexpensively in real time is staggering, even compared to a few years ago. Depth is that sometimes we get very fast information, but it doesn't really tell us much more than we already know. And of course, the third one is that what we are learning and communicating has to be relevant, to be connected to the priorities of our organizations. And I think getting all three of these, to me, is the holy grail. I think it's always been the holy grail. What's different today is that things are changing so fast that it's breathless and you're constantly balancing.
That's a beautiful perspective in terms of balancing the triangle. So if you have to give a report card on the industry, where do you think the industry is on balancing the three corners of the triangle, as you put it?
Oh, that's a good question. I'd say I think speed is what everyone's pretty focused on and mastering these days, not just AI companies, but I think for most solutions, we understand that clients need their results, if not in real time, very, very quickly. So I think we're all over speed. Depth of insights, telling people something they didn't already know. I think that's a constant challenge, but we're building really interesting tools and methodologies to be able to handle big questions that are, more anticipatory and predictive rather than just reflective. And I think that's going to really help us. I think relevance has always been the biggest challenge. I know for me, when I was a market research supplier, relevance was actually really, really critical. But, it's so easy to take everything that we've done and, just work on small problems. And I think being connected to what really matters in the business and what's happening in the boardroom is always a challenge. So I'd say that's the one we have to work on the most.
Awesome. So, you're saying speed is largely a kind of solved problem, but let's talk about the depth and the relevance, because those are two areas where, you have done some pioneering work, particularly when it comes to depth. So while, just segueing from depth, why don't you give the audience a quick intro into your career? And
Sure.
Yeah.
Well, in the beginning of my career, after business school, I worked in marketing at General Foods, which was eventually sold to Kraft. And I actually only was at General Foods for about a year, but I'll tell you, it was a very, very transformational experience for me. And I'll tell you why. So I didn't know what I want to do. I go in, they say, Diane, what product do you want to work on? I mean, we've got coffee, we've got lemonade, we've got stovetop stuffing, Pebble cereal, Gainsburgers at the time. I mean, we had all of these products. And I said, play me. Wherever you think you really need the help, I'm absolutely happy to be there. Great. I said, do me a favor, though. Just give me a product that I understand. Like, don't give me decaffeinated coffee because I just don't get that. Like, why would anybody drink something that tastes awful, but yet doesn't deliver the primary benefit? So, of course, General Foods, in all of their wisdom, puts me on Brim decaffeinated coffee. And it was the beginning of my love affair with trying to understand people who are different from me. I mean, I did, 50-cent coupons and Reader's Digest and all those promotional things, but I loved trying to understand the people who liked Brim and who were engaged with the problem that it solved and all of that. And I think that was the beginning of my love of the research business. After that, I joined a small startup in the training and development space where I spent a big chunk of my early career. Training and development was a brand new arena, and I learned a ton there. And I got a front seat in how to take a startup and grow it fast and manage it well. I eventually left to start my own company, which ended up being Communispace. And now in the next phase of my career, I have more of a portfolio life. I'm on 4 corporate boards and a bunch of nonprofits. I invest in and support startups. And I also parlayed my love of market research into the political arena, where I've been in conversation with a panel of 500 voters since 2016.
Wow.
And
that's
here we go. Here's the advertisement. And that's what I wrote my book about, our common ground. And it's really funny. This book did really well when it came out a couple of years ago, and then the sales kind of went down. And now, people are buying it again because, of course, everyone wants to know what's going on with all of those voters who are different from them. So, yeah, now I have a portfolio life.
Awesome. That's brilliant. We both met many years ago, and I've been following your journey very closely. Truly an inspiring one that a lot of budding entrepreneurs can learn a lot from. So tell me, what prompted you to start Communispace? How did you identify the need in the marketplace to begin with?
Yeah, we started Communispace, Stan, in the beginning of the internet era. I mean, people talked about what the internet was going to be, and it was the 3 C's: content, commerce, community. And honestly, I fell in love with community. I mean, from the first day I logged on to America Online. I mean, remember they would send us floppy disks in the mail?
Yeah.
I was captivated by that. I mean, I thought it was incredible that you could, get online and connect with people from all over the world about issues and projects and ideas that you were passionate about. And so our team became convinced that online community could be used for a lot of things, not just like, let's all share how much we love tennis or whatever, but could transform the way that companies got insight and inspiration from their consumers, that we could we could leverage that notion of online communities to be the equivalent of a focus group on steroids. And our first client, who was Tom Brailsford at Hallmark, had agreed to test our prototype software, and we got a bunch of consumers and everything there. But he pushed us really hard on how to build the product. And eventually we got some other early clients who were just willing to go on a journey with us, like Jim Figura at Colgate-Palmolive and Gretchen Waitley at Kraft and Patty Waitling at Unilever, Jonathan Craig at Schwab, who's now a super senior executive there. They were incredibly brave in the beginning to try early versions of what we were doing because the idea of an online community applied to market research was extremely controversial in those days because we were building relationships with respondents, which was a no-no. It's like, you can't know these people. You can't ask bias. Yeah. You can't ask a question of someone and then the following week ask a different question of the same person. Like, you can't do that. And of course, ultimately, we learned that if you could build trust with your respondents, you could dramatically increase the speed and quality and, importantly, the candor of their responses. So we started finding that bias actually went down. I remember I used to say to clients, just think, like, if you need a haircut, who's going to tell you need a haircut? Someone who doesn't care about you or someone that you have a relationship with? So, but in the beginning, that was extremely controversial. I mean, we'd go to conferences and I literally got booed from time to time.
That is very fascinating. That is fascinating.
Yeah.
So in this wonderful, entrepreneurial journey that you embarked on and created an enormously successful business against all odds, what are the 2 or 3 must-do things that entrepreneurs should, can learn from you? And maybe 2 or 3 watch-outs based on your experience.
Okay. Well, look, the obvious must-do is listen to your customers. I mean, it's so easy to fall in love with your product. And very often you can have all of the brilliant technology in the world, but if it doesn't respond to something a client is trying to accomplish, it doesn't matter if it's a sophisticated product. So, listening and you have to love what you're doing because you're doing it 24/7 when you're an entrepreneur, but being open to the fact that you might need to make shifts, I think is really important. Second must do is, it's really all about the team. I mean, I used to say business is easy. It's all about 2 things: finding and keeping great customers and finding and keeping great people. And the people part is so important in the beginning. You have limited resources and every employee is an investment. And the consequences of hiring the wrong person, especially on your leadership team, are deadly. So, one of the benefits of starting Communispace in my 40s was that I had incredible former workers that I knew I wanted to hire, that I knew were already A players. And, they joined.
Awesome.
The only other must do is it's helpful to have luck. I mean, look, the best arena is, Tom Brailsford of Hallmark, who I mentioned already, he was our first client. We just were lucky that we had great clients in the beginning. Tom had us in Business Week 2 months into his implementation. And we had an article here that was acted as if we were this big established company. And, we started going to conferences and I had clients who were willing to come to the conferences and talk about what they were doing. And I never really took that for granted. Watch outs. One watch out is know that you will probably pivot so that your first idea won't end up being what you're offering. I mean, so many people who have early stage companies, they start in one arena and then they move into another. I was actually just on a call with an entrepreneur who was doing a lot of political research. And when I looked at what he was doing, I said, it's very interesting to look at all this trend analysis and all this sentiment analysis, but you could disrupt brand trackers. Like, you should get out of the political arena where it's really, really hard to work with people and, move into industry. So looking for the pivot. Number 2, if you're trying to raise money from people, just know that it's a second job and it will take you twice as long as you thought you would. And I think the last watch out is know the space. if you're building an insights company and you don't come from the research industry, don't be a jerk. Like, don't be arrogant. Learn the language, learn the issues. I knew something about market research, but I didn't really know the industry. I had people saying to me, you should go to an ARF conference. And I was like, what's ARF? And I ultimately hired a market research veteran early in our company. And she helped us create the slide in our deck that ended up being the one that prospects love the most, which is what Communispace should not be used for.
Mm.
And I learned a lot about that in the process of doing it, because otherwise, you go in, you say, this is really great. People say, what can you use it for? You're like, oh, you could use it for anything. You could ask this, you could ask this. Well, actually, that's not true. I mean, that you wouldn't use it if you were trying to make a very, very big decision where you needed a lot of quantitative research, et cetera. So yeah, those would be my watch outs.
Awesome. Crystal clear. I think, there's a lot that I learned from that, and I'm going to reflect on what I'm doing as an entrepreneur and benchmark it against what you said. Thank you so much. Yeah.
Yeah.
Now, you've been in the industry and you've watched it up close. What needs to change now and in the near future for the insights industry to become more relevant as an entity?
Mm-hmm.
What needs to change?
Yeah. Well, I think the conversations that we have with clients need to change. I think most of our conversations now is the client wants to know X, and we say, here's the answer to X, and look how fast and interesting it is. I think we need to elevate our conversation. So I used to always tell clients that their Communispace community would do a great job helping them make a decision between the blue package and the red package, or ad number 1 and ad number 2. But that the holy grail was to use it for the biggest issues. Understanding how their markets were dramatically shifting, seeing how consumers would change, inspiring completely new products, and coming up with new, really breakthrough questions. So I'll give you an example, Stan. I just read an article this morning. I'll take it out of industry and I'll go to the recent presidential election. And David Brooks of the New York Times, wrote a great article. And in essence, he said, we are analyzing the results of the election and we ran our campaigns based on segments. What do you do for Black voters? What about young people? How do we make women happy? What about affluent white men? What about Latinos, etc.? And what he argued was that all of our mental models that are so focused on demographics are no longer serving us. Because if you look at the data, there is just not a vast difference between how men vote and how women vote, which is like hard for people to get their arms around, if you think about that. But that we need to change all of the questions that we are asking about American voters, because they're not out there going, I'm a woman and I'm only voting for women's issues, because of course, almost half the women, voted for Donald Trump, etc. So changing the way we think about elections, changing the way we structure our data and promote our candidates. So I think that something that totally shifts your mental model, that really gives you a headache, that says we're playing in this arena and the arena is changing, is exciting. So figuring out how we really work with the very biggest issues, I think is great. I mean, obviously we need to be on top of technology so that we, don't lose the load on that to, a tech community. But I think working the big issues is the biggest challenge.
Brilliant. Now, I'll pivot to the second subject, which is all about relevance. And I think there is no better person who can provide some insights on how can insights industry be relevant and earn a seat at the table, because you are at the table. Yeah, you are in, as you said in the beginning, you are in a few boards. What is the expectation at a board level that you think Insight could potentially leverage and make themselves indispensable to the board?
Well, look, you sit in a board meeting And when marketing comes, they go, here's our new ad.
Mm.
And you watch the ad and you're sitting there as a board member. And I'm usually the person with the most marketing expertise in the boardroom. And I don't even know whether the ad is right.
Mm.
Sometimes my gut feel is it's good. Sometimes my gut feel is it's not good. But it's just, that's the kind of thing we see in the boardroom. We don't usually get a lot of context that says, by the way, you're going to see something that's a little different here because we have shifted the way we are thinking about who is doing business with us. And that shift is way more important to me than seeing one more ad, or we'll see the funnel. So we're looking at leads that are coming in and how those are converting and how they relate to business and everything. Again, that's interesting, but I think board members are much more interested in why have we done that with the ad, or even with conversions and everything in a funnel. What's going on there? Who are the people who are responding to what we're doing? What are we doing? What's the insight that we can get from how our deal flow is coming in to the organization? So what I would say is think about the fact that the board members are looking for context. They're looking for the why behind who is buying, who is not buying, who is winning competitively, who is not winning competitively, right? What products are doing well, what products are not doing well. So if there's an opportunity, for instance, with customers to completely rethink who core customers are and why they buy, that's super interesting. So the role of any presentation in the boardroom is to enlighten the board, not so that they think you're great, but I've heard insights presentations that have just been, here's our personas, here we go. And I'm thinking, all right, here's some new personas. But I've heard insights presentations that have changed the boardroom conversation for the entire meeting. So the question to think is not, what am I doing that might be interesting to the board, or what am I doing that's interesting to me? It's how can I, because I kind of own the why behind a lot of what's going on in the business, how can I make the board more effective and more insightful because of what I'm about to present?
Yeah.
I would literally say to myself, the couple of days while I'm preparing for this board meeting, if my board presentation is a home run, what are the things that board members will understand that they probably don't know now? And I know that sounds like, I think in times that can sound like it's not about condescending to the board, but it's just, what do I know and what's happening in the business that will allow board members to make better decisions and have more rich conversations if they've heard the insights that I'm about to share. And that's the standard that I would use.
So that's a question people need to ask themselves before they stand up and present to the board, so that you can.
I think so. I think so. Literally, the exercise I would go through, Stan, is I would literally start my presentation by saying, look, let me start at the end. At the end of this 20-minute presentation, I am hoping that you will understand 3 things about the current state of our business.
Okay.
Ta-da, ta-da, ta-da. And then go into it. But literally say, I want to change your mind. I want to enlighten you. I want to, do whatever. And you want to use the right language there. You don't want to sound like, you're better than the board or whatever, but it's at that level. And I'd start my presentation that way.
Awesome. I have a couple of last questions, but I think the one that I'm going to ask you now is probably the most important one, given that this is your core strength, as I know it, based on our 20-year relationship. You're not about tools and technology. Yes, of course, tools and technology are important, and you've always brought some great technology to the table. What softer aspects should entrepreneurs focus on to create a strong business? Because sometimes people think that, if I have a great tool, great technology, everything will fall in place. It doesn't. There is something else. There's the factor. What is it? What is it that entrepreneurs should be thinking about from your experience? Yeah.
Well, look, I guess two things. Number one, I've talked about customers before, Stan, but at Communispace, with all the money that we put into our technology, which was probably about $15 million, it was a lot in those days.
Yeah.
Our competitive advantage was that our clients loved us.
Hmm.
And we were obsessed with them, and we did everything we could to help make them heroes. So at least in our space, our corporate clients are super busy, and they don't have time to take sales calls from 100 vendors and look at people's websites and learn the ins and even if they're buying from you, they and their teams don't have time to learn the ins and outs of what you are offering. So they will pay you to take the complexity and the details off of their hands if you deliver. So we had, and many people who are listening to this probably we had a subscription model. And so for us, think about it. The happier our clients were, the faster they grew. So we had a subscription model. They're paying us a certain amount of money a month. If they love you, they sign a 3-year contract instead of a 1-year contract. Or if they really love you, we used to find that if they really loved us, they didn't just have one community. They'd say, I'd also want to have this kind of a community and this kind of a community. All of a sudden, we'd be working with clients and they had 5 communities. So happy clients were the most critical thing we needed to grow. And of course, what's behind that, I guess, is the second softer thing, which is that you have to create a culture within your organization that is consistent with your business. So what I mean by that is not sitting around writing out your values. I don't mean having pizza parties. I'm saying literally, what kind of company do we need to be able to deliver for clients? So obviously, if I said to you before that, we were obsessed with our clients. When I interviewed people, especially in the early days, I would ask them questions like, you're on the soccer field watching your child play, and all of a sudden you get a text from a client. What do you do? And if the person said, look, work-life balance is really, really critical to me, and I will get back to that client first thing Monday morning, I didn't hire them because I didn't need somebody to say the client is more important than my kid, but I needed somebody who was willing to get back to that client in short order and say, how big is the problem? I'm on the soccer field. Do you need me to call you now? Etc. So creating a culture where the client was number one was really, really critical for us because we were trying to invest in our competitive advantage. And I think, the culture was a key source of that. So,
example, I'm so aligned with that soccer ground example. I think it's critical. It is critical. Obsession with customers. It's very important.
Yeah. Look, you don't have to be obsessed with customers. You could have a technology that is different from everybody else in the world, and you could have a brilliant engineering team, and it could be you could be delivering things that maybe your team doesn't matter. There are certainly aspects of the technology industry where it doesn't matter that much. Or I remember my husband and I bought a Tesla like 5 years ago, and the product was so much fun and so cool. It was great. I didn't really care who the salesperson was. The irony is that when we had a problem with the car, don't even get me started on how horrible the service was. I couldn't figure out how to call. No one would call me back. We brought the car in. All of a sudden, no one knew where it was. I could go on and on. But the point was that all of a sudden, I wasn't so happy with the car anymore because there was nothing with it other than the product. So most of the time, you have to really think about who is there for the client and the client team and how you can kind of use that to leverage what you're doing.
Awesome. Any threats that we as an insights industry need to plan for?
Well, look, I think the biggest threat right now is the rate of change. I'll tell you, Stan, I have seen that on my boards. You get a great idea with technology or not, and you work your tail off to create the best and most innovative product in the world, and everyone loves it. Fast forward 18 months, it's a commodity. Everybody's doing it. You try to master something. I talk to companies that are trying to do artificial intelligence in the research industry a lot. And, in January, they have something that nobody else has. And by April, everybody else is getting into the space. So I think we're gonna have to pick our shots, but thinking through, I have something unique, but what happens when everybody and their brother has the ability to do the same thing? Not because I wasn't visionary, but because, Chat GPT came and all of a sudden everyone's able to deliver that really, really matters. So it's not the fact that new technologies are coming on board. It's more just the rate of that kind of change. Biggest threat.
Awesome. Awesome. Diane, this has been an incredibly stimulating. I learned a lot personally, and I'm sure people who listen to this are going to learn a lot from this. Thank you so much.
Thank you, Stan. Well, I've learned a lot from you, so that makes me feel great.
Thanks for joining the Insights and Innovators podcast from Market Research Institute International. Click subscribe to never miss an episode and visit us at mrii.org for more market research insights.